Welcome back, everybody, to another segment of Wednesday Wisdom on the Educational AD Podcast. We'll be right back with this week's Wednesday Wisdom guest, but as always, we're going to give a shout out to our sponsors. Now, stay right here. Don't hit that fast forward button. These are all companies I used as an AD. They're all great companies. You should be using them too. It's only going to be 3 minutes. Here we go. We want to thank Gipper for all their support of the podcast. Go to Gipper.com and their team is going to have you creating world-class content for your social media channel in seconds. Whether it's a social media post to celebrate a big victory or an entire newsletter, Gipper is going to have you up and running in no time. It's professional graphic design made easy. Go to Gipper.com to get started. We also want to thank Vital Signs Wall of Fame. If you're looking for a really cool way to display your school record board or your school's Hall of Fame, check out their interactive touch screen. That's right, touch screen video consoles. If you put one of these in your gym lobby, your school's auditorium, your main hall, it's going to be a magnet for kids, coaches, parents, sponsors, alumni. Go to vitalsignswalloffame.com. Check out their great products today. We also want to thank Home Campus. Home Campus is a platform that you're going to use every single day. Scheduling, rosters, results. For me, the athletic clearance and eligibility platform just can't be beat. To get started, just go to homecampus.com. That's it, homecampus.com. We also want to thank Snap Raise. Have you ever spent weeks and weeks with a fundraiser and been disappointed? Well, those days are gone. Go to snapraise.com. It's hands down the best online fundraiser out there. We used it at our school. It was a huge hit with our teams, our coaches, our parents. I'm telling you, it works. Go to snapraise.com. You can check out their other great platforms. But if you're looking for a fundraiser, you just found it. It's snapraise.com. We also want to thank Ohio University. Now, I didn't get my master's from Ohio, but my assistant AD did, and it was a great experience. It's very affordable, totally online, just 20 months. And while he was earning his master's in athletic administration, he also completed 11 NIAAA leadership training courses at no extra charge. Check out the Ohio University Online Masters in Athletic Administration. We also want to thank Huddle. I used Huddle for years as a football coach, but when I became an athletic director, I made sure that our school was a Huddle school. And our coaches, every single one of our coaches, just loved the tools that Huddle provided. Our students loved the videos, our parents loved the streaming, but there's so much more. Go to huddle.com, join the 8 million users. Turn your school into a Huddle school. We want to thank Sideline Interactive, indoor score tables and video boards. Go to sidelineinteractive.com and you can schedule a live web demo to see all their products in action. Probably the best purchase I ever made as an AD was our Sideline Interactive indoor score table. Go to sidelineinteractive.com for more information. We also want to say thanks to our good friends at Hometown. Hometown's changing the game for schools and organizations with their suite of solutions for things like digital ticketing, fee-free fundraising, and athletic websites. Whether you're an athletic director, a coach, or a school administrator, Hometown is making it easy for you to save time, raise more money, and bring your community together. Go to hometown.com for more information. We also want to say thanks to Athletic Surveys by LifeTrack. Athletic directors already get feedback, but a lot of times it's from a very small group that just wants to complain. Athletic Surveys will connect you to that group so you can hear their concerns and hopefully address them. But they're also going to connect you to the 98% that supports your program. And having that data in your hands is incredibly valuable, especially when you're visiting with that frustrated parent, maybe your principal, or even your school board. Go to athleticsurveys.com. They're going to create a custom survey that lets you take the pulse of everybody in your program. athleticsurveys.com. Welcome back, everybody, to another segment of Wednesday Wisdom on the Educational AD Podcast. We have one of our, possibly even our most frequent Wednesday Wisdom contributors back with us. It's always a treat. Regular listeners will recognize the name Dr. Megan Buning. She has an incredible background. She was a Division I athlete, a Division I coach. She left all that behind and became a researcher. She's now a teaching specialist at Florida State University, also a member of the FSU coach degree program. She has so many certifications in mental performance and more, and we're just very fortunate to have her back with us. Dr. Megan Buning, welcome back to the Educational AD Podcast.
Well, as always, Jake, it's such a pleasure. I appreciate you continuing to have me, and I really look forward to today's conversation.
Well, you're the reason I reached out to you initially. I just saw your profile. Athlete, coach, but also researcher, and there's just so much. I'm not going to even do my air quotes. So much so-called science out there that I think coaches and ADs, they're really searching for absolute truths. What are some things I can do with my athletes? What are some things I can do with my coaches if I'm an AD? And you are just spot on with things that actually work. So, what do you got for our listeners this week on Wednesday Wisdom?
Well, as you mentioned, I like to bring in what we call evidence-based practice. So when we at Florida State in the FSU coach program, what our students are going to learn is where are some of what they experience, where's that coming from, and then how can they use the evidence to help them make decisions. Not that it's going to be spot on, as you say, every time, but the evidence gives us some foundation instead of it just being an opinion. I also, when I work in the mental performance field, I inform what I do with clients with the evidence. And so what we're going to talk about today overlaps into both the coaching role and in the performer role, but also with athletic directors, because obviously I know that's primarily who your audience is targeting. Today, I want to talk about hindsight bias. And so have you ever heard of the saying, hindsight is 2020?
Use it all the time.
Yes, I kind of figured that's a very popular phrase and statement, something that we've probably all used at some point or heard at least. And basically, that's a quick way to define hindsight bias. So and there's many different types of bias, and I want to dig into this one in particular today, and maybe I'll hit another one in a future podcast. But to get us started, I want to review what the term bias actually means and what a bias is. All right, so when you look up the term bias, you can do this in any dictionary, and it's going to be, I quote, the tendency to favor or prefer one person, group, or idea over another. Or it could be read as the tendency to respond one way compared to another when making choices or decisions. And the way that we see bias, it can show up through your thoughts and actions. So typically, your thoughts lead to actions. And these thoughts and actions can be based on inaccurate perceptions and superficial information or perceptions. So only the surface level type of information. All right, so what are some things that could cause bias? Well, 3 common things that cause bias are, this one should be very familiar, stereotypes. Have you had any experience with stereotypes?
Well, there's another side to that. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but that we say stereotypes exist because to a degree they are or seem to be true.
Yeah, they do. And we'll talk a little bit. Now, this is just a general bias, but that I'm talking about at this moment. But sure, stereotypes, we tend to think that those are true because there's some sort of evidence that leads to that. But then I want to challenge you a little bit. And as I go through this particular type of bias, question that. Are stereotype biases, is there truth to them? So one cause of stereotypes, too, is your unconsciousness. And many of our listeners have probably heard of unconscious bias. This is unconscious preference, and its most famous form of unconscious bias is implicit bias, where people have a negative response to someone, a group, a thing, but they're not consciously aware of this response or attitude. All right. Another element that can cause any sort of bias is perceived social value. And we'll hit on that here in a second. But what is the effect of having a bias in general? Well, as you can imagine, or if maybe you've experienced yourself, it can be unfair treatment, or there could be errors in judgment, which usually kind of leads to that unfair treatment, right? So bias can affect how people perceive data or information, and then also how people interpret that data or information. And this is one reason that with researchers, when you are trained in the field of research or you're learning research, you have to address bias in your work, or you should, because when you are looking at that data, your bias can make a difference in how you're interpreting what you find. All right. So a couple examples of just bias in general. We'll start with some fun ones here, but anybody out there have a Stanley Cup? I'm laughing, and here I am with a Stanley water bottle. It's not one of those cups you see everywhere, but the Stanley Cup craze. People have attached a social value to a specific brand of cup or tumbler, even though there are other brands that make similar cups. All right, so that's an example of that perceived social value bias. Another bias that you can relate to, I'll use me personally. I cheer for the University of South Carolina Gamecocks the loudest because I played ball there. Next, I cheer for the Seminoles because I coached here. I'm an alum. I work here. Maybe not. Maybe I shouldn't say next. I should say, yay, sports ball. I cheer for them all, right? And then also I cheer for Ole Miss because I coached at Ole Miss. I'm an alum. And, so I have a bias towards my favorite teams. What are your bias there?
Well, you heard me talk about being born and raised in Oregon and in a house. I jokingly say that worshipped the Oregon Ducks. So, huge Duck fan. I still haven't gotten over their collapse in the national playoffs. But coming from the Northwest, people think I would cheer for the Seahawks, which I do. But as a junior high school, it's a long story. As a junior high school student, I became a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I've been a Steeler fan ever since. Never lived there, but just became a Steeler fan.
So you are more likely to find yourself watching those games, purchasing that merchandise, all the things, because you have a bias. Here's another one, which is really interesting. And let's see if you can think of something. Again, I'm using me personally, but let's say that you're on the market to buy a new car. All right. For me, I like trucks. So maybe I'm on the market to buy a new F-150, and I start seeing that specific model of truck everywhere.
Yeah.
Have you ever had that happen?
Oh, frequently. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's confirmation bias. Those trucks aren't out there more than usual. It's just that I have decided that that's what I like, and I'm convincing myself and my husband that I need another one. So I'm selecting data to confirm that that's what I want to do. So let's think about this, just bias in general, of what it could look like with coaches. So if you think about with coaches, have you ever been a coach or had a coach or seen a coach that tends to play or interact with specific athletes more because those athletes are, quote, easier to coach? And so when we think about that, and I've been guilty of that, it's really easy. So those athletes tend to have qualities similar to the coach. They have a style of play that the coach likes the most. It reminds them of the former players they liked or something along those lines. Well, that is a form of bias. And so when you start thinking about it in terms of coaching, it gets a little more serious, doesn't it?
No, absolutely. Those traits, we've talked to our coaches before about that, about trying to look beyond and make it not just an opinion. We're going to cut this kid or we're going to keep this kid, but have some data that hopefully will negate some of that bias.
Sure. And you want to be aware. So that's the first step. If you're not aware of what's going on, you're not going to be able to change it or change the decisions you make, right? So now, do we all have bias? Yes, I'll just answer that question. We all, every single one of us that is listening to this podcast and is walking around in the world, we all have bias. It's a normal, natural part of who we are and how our brain works. But here's the funny, not ha ha thing that literature really supports is that we all have bias, but we are more likely to recognize bias in others than ourselves. So we think that others may have bias, but we don't. All right. So the good news is that this particular effect tends to go away when people are taught about bias. So that awareness, right? And that we all have it. And so this is why you will see people teaching on bias and trying to measure it and capture it. But today, I want to dig in a little bit into hindsight bias. So remember, there's all different types of bias, but this particular one struck me just based off of what I've been going through with clients and students over the past couple of months. So I asked you, had you ever heard the phrase hindsight's 2020? And you said yes. Now, I want you to think about this. Have you ever found yourself saying, well, I could have told you that would happen?
Uh, Hopefully not, but I'm sure I've probably used those words at least once in my career.
Uh-huh. In my family, you might hear it as, well, duh. And so, and so that's hindsight bias, is when you have a response like that, you are participating in showing hindsight bias. So what is it? So hindsight bias is probably what you think it is. It's when you look back after an event's happened and you overestimate how much of that event you could have foreseen. So basically, you think you could have predicted that event more accurately than you really could have. And you may know people, or maybe this is you, who are know-it-alls. They always think, well, yeah, I knew that, or I could have told you that would happen. And in that situation, they are struggling. Have some mercy. They are struggling with hindsight bias. So here's some other examples of hindsight bias that I've encountered or that you might encounter. So I think the team with the winningest record will win the game before the game. So then when the other team wins, I then might state, well, I knew that they would win this one. Right? I knew it. I knew they were going to win. Or think about students. Students may read through the assigned reading for a course and they think this is easy, this is common sense information. I actually run across this not only with students, but with my mental performance clients. And they may think, well, I knew that. I already knew that. I knew that all along. That's hindsight bias. And then finally, I think when I put my notes together, this was just after the election, but perhaps a vote occurs and you see the results and you think, well, I knew that person or that thing would get voted through. Okay. All right. So let's think about the stages of hindsight bias. These are the stages that you move through if you are going to fall prey to hindsight bias. First, you're going to remember your original prediction of an outcome, and you're going to think it's more accurate than it actually was. So I knew that was going to happen, and you're thinking that you were more on point than you really were. Then you're going to think that the outcome was more predictable than it actually was. So because you recall the outcome you recalled it being more accurate than it actually was, you're going to think, well, then that event, whatever happened, can be predicted more easily than what it really can be. Then this leads you to think that you could have foreseen this outcome or event the entire time, right? So just to recap again, if you find yourself remembering how you originally predicted the outcome of some event, you are recalling that outcome to be more accurate than it really was, which leads you to think that that outcome is more predictable than it really is, which then leads you to believe that you could have foreseen this outcome the entire time. Okay, so you see how that builds on each other? All right, so what causes this? Well, cognitive inputs are one. So some things are true based on your previous learning and experiences, but what happens is you selectively pick or remember information to confirm your hindsight. right? So kind of fun fact there, key word in there was remember, right? So that taps into memory. We know now that our memory is actually not very reliable. We misremember and even alter events all of the time. And I'll give you an example with me. My children and my husband, they laugh at me all the time because I will tell a story from my past and it's a memory that my husband had, not mine. Like he went through that event, but I am taking it as my memory. And we have gotten into arguments about this, right? So you misremember things. So our memory is not reliable. But those cognitive inputs, we're selectively picking information that's going to confirm our prediction of whatever happened, right? Another thing that causes hindsight bias is metacognitive input. So this kind of higher level of thinking. This is when you easily understand why an outcome happened, and therefore you think that event is more foreseeable than it is. And so that gets into just kind of you personally, like you may understand something happened and it comes very easily to you. So then you're like, well, yeah, I can predict that. Versus me, I may not get it quite as fast, so I might not have that same response. Right? And then finally, motivational inputs cause hindsight bias. So inherently, people tend to like a world or environment that's structured and predictable. This is why performance routines, any type of routines work, is because we like the structure and predictability. So for you to think that you knew the outcome, that will help you place an event in some sort of orderly and predictable box. Yeah, I knew that would happen. That fits into your structure, right? That makes your brain feel comfortable. And so let's then talk about why hindsight bias is an issue. Well, one is that hindsight bias can cause you to be overconfident. And so then what happens is your judgment can be skewed when you need to make decisions. So you don't remember the evidence or facts around past events correctly. So maybe this event happened in the past, and because you think that you already know it or know what's going to happen, you're that overconfident, you're not remembering evidence and facts of when it originally happened. And so this hampers your ability to make those sound decisions when new events occur. And you fail to accurately evaluate the decisions that you made before the event occurred. So you may not be learning from your mistakes prior. So essentially what you're doing is in your brain, you're rewriting history because you're removing any evidence that you were uncertain or any errors that you made in the past that could have led to the actual outcome, right? This overconfidence, and I think it kind of came through in that description there, but that can prevent you from learning. You miss learning opportunities because you're not reflecting and evaluating accurately, kind of skimming through, right? This can lead you to be taking risks that aren't necessary or are even counterproductive. You think because you can easily predict an outcome so you just kind of use the same strategies in the future, but you fail to foresee obstacles or unique circumstances that could indicate that your previous approach or decision isn't really going to work with this new one that's coming up, right? Hindsight bias can lead to blaming. How many times do you see this within a team or in a staff? This can lead you to blame the person or people that the outcome happened to. You may think that they should have listened to you or should have known that this would happen, that it's their fault, that they got what's coming. I know that's kind of hard to admit, but have you ever had that thought?
I'm sure I've had it at least once in my career.
Sure, sure. And if you're in a leadership position or if you're working as a coach with a team, you've got to be very careful about the blame game. Right? I mean, there's a difference between allowing, I'll speak from a parent's point of view, allowing my child to fail and struggle because I know that that's where some of the learning is going to be, and then me saying, well, you got what you deserve. Yeah, there's a very big difference there. And so lastly, how do you work on avoiding hindsight bias? Because I don't know about you, but I don't want to do those things. I don't want to experience the negative effects of hindsight bias. I want to make sure that I am seeing a situation clearly. I am evaluating myself, and I am not falling into the trap of blaming. So one way, and I've got 4 ways for you. Some of them you and I have actually talked about before, but this first way is counterfactual thinking. I'm sure that's not new to your listeners. So after the event, mentally review all of the outcomes that could have happened but didn't. All right, so what could have happened here? It didn't happen, but it could have. And this can help to have, if you have another person do this with you, because it can help you see things that maybe you couldn't in the moment. And this helps you get a more balanced view of what actually happened. Another tactic that you can use is that if you're in a position that makes a lot of decisions for a team, a school, is keep a decision-making journal. So this event happened. And I think this is pretty neat anyway, especially for those of you that like to journal and write. So you've got this decision coming up or something has happened and you journal that. Right, as soon as you can, like if you know what's coming, some of those decisions we know are coming up, so we can journal around that. This can have a lot of benefits, the journaling piece of it, because it can provide a log of how you thought about the decision or event. And then after the outcome is revealed, you can go back and really see what you were thinking about the event instead of assuming that you already knew the outcome. And so basically it's getting your thoughts down prior and then you're fact checking yourself on what you think. Pause and reflect before you call the outcome. This is another tip, right? So before you decide what the outcome is going to be, pause and reflect. So after the event happened, take a moment to recall what you thought would happen before and then compare that to what actually happened. Obviously, if you wrote it down, that's going to be easier, for those that you can. And then finally, use structured decision-making tools. These should be, not new to you all, but one example that I've talked about before is red teaming, and this is just one example, but red teaming is where you have people that are trying to poke holes, basically, and telling you why the decision won't work, that kind of thing. But these tools, any of those structured decision-making tools are going to give you multiple perspectives that consider foreseeable obstacles and failures in the decision. And they're going to help you avoid simplistic thoughts, which is what hindsight bias produces. So that's what I have on hindsight bias. What do you think?
Well, you saw me scribbling down notes as always. You just some really cool stuff. I guess there were 2 thoughts that were kind of weaving back and forth. I'm going to start with, I guess, maybe the better example. It's indoor track season now. And, Jan and I, we work as officials with some pretty big time college athletes and high school. And this year in particular, I've noticed athletes, mostly, let's say the better college vaulters, but some high school too. And because I do high school meets, I've seen these boys and girls at the state meet, pretty high level. They are journaling. And I haven't said, well, hey, what are you writing down? But it appears just casual glances that felt good, or just different things. And it goes right along with what you were talking about, this reflection and journaling to improve performance. And hopefully that's going to prevent or reduce, the hindsight bias, and just give them, well, what was I thinking on that vault where I went, 4 meters or whatever it was? Is that, am I in the right area there?
Yeah, you could be. I mean, obviously people are going to journal different things, but that journaling is a technique that we use in the mental performance field. You'll see that obviously in the therapy settings as well, but for performance, it could be, this is how I felt, this is how I prepared, this is the routine I took. I see this actually a lot with runners and the track and field type athletes, the journaling piece of it. Because they want to, any athlete performer wants to be consistent in what they do. And so having that moment to capture what it is they were feeling prior to the event absolutely is going to give them something to reflect back on and say, oh, well, I did do that, or I need to do that. I forgot about that. And when you think about hindsight bias, yes, I think there could be some evidence for those performers, those athletes, of, well, I knew I wasn't going to hit that. Well, actually, when I looked in my journal, I documented things that showed me I would hit that. So now they can, that jump or, whatever that time. So now they can counter those thoughts in the future. And so journaling in general is just a very powerful tool. It's not one that is easy for people that don't like to write. Like for me, I also work in the DISC behavior profile space. And for my profile, I can, and this makes a whole lot of sense. I can tell you, I'm like, I don't have time to slow down and journal. So, but there are other ways that you can capture that evidence.
Yeah. No, just again, it's just fascinating to hear. Again, science, real stuff, but
Mhm.
now turning that into an art and applying it with each athlete or as an AD with each coach. Just a very, very cool stuff. Um, I mentioned at the top of the interview that Megan is also part of the FSU coach program at Florida State University. She also, she's mentioned it. She works with one-on-one with athletes, with teams, etc. So, Megan, if one of our listeners, and listeners, I'm encouraging you to do this. If one of them wanted to reach out and pick your brain a little bit more, find out more about your services or about FSU Coach, what's the best way that they can get a hold of Dr. Megan Bunning?
Sure, I'm gonna give you the easiest one, and that's my FSU email, m.bunning. That's Buning at fsu.edu.
Okay. And Dr. Bunning also has a pretty good Twitter game. She's on there every once in a while, and her information is also on LinkedIn. Dr. Megan Bunning, thanks again for sharing with our listeners. All the best as it's a busy time for you with softball and teaching and your family, and we won't even get into the horses. But thanks again for sharing with our listeners.
Yes, thank you. And y'all, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm happy to help.
Again, tremendous resource, Dr. Megan Bunning. For listeners, we want to say thanks to you and remind you that we upload the Zoom recordings of every interview to the Educational AD Podcast YouTube channel. We do this segment every week, and just about every day we try to share stories and best practices from the world of athletics. So hopefully you'll join us on the next episode of the Educational AD Podcast. We'll see you next time. Dr. Megan Bunning, make sure you look her up again on LinkedIn and Twitter and at FSU Coach. Before we go, of course, we want to give a shout out to every single one of our sponsors. Gipper, Huddle, Hometown. We want to say thanks to Snap Rays and Vital Signs Wall of Fame. I want to thank Ohio University and their online masters, Home Campus, Sideline Interactive, and Athletic Surveys. Check out these sponsors. Tell them you heard about it on the podcast. They'll give you a nice discount. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time on the Educational AD Podcast.